Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your rear brake pads and your rear brake rotors on a 2015 Toyota Rav4. This is the XLE all-wheel drive, and this is the disc drum or rotor drum combo here in the back because our parking brake shoes are inside here. But the first thing I like to do is press this caliper piston back inside the caliper, which will push the brake fluid backwards up through the system into the master cylinder. So you do need to make sure that you've got room in the master cylinder for the additional fluid, otherwise you're going to overflow and make a mess. So let's go take a look under the hood and make sure we've got room in the master cylinder for the additional fluid. You can see down below our fluid level is well below the max, and we have plenty of room to push the fluid backwards up into here without it overflowing and making a mess. A lot of people ask me if you need to take this lid off in order to do that. You really don't. The resistance in the caliper piston doesn't seem to change whether I take that off or leave it on. Brake fluid absorbs moisture, even moisture in the air, and as little as you can expose it to new air, the better. Exposing it to more air and moisture will cause it to degrade and go bad. So I'm going to leave that on while we push the caliper piston back in. As an alternative method, you could also take this cap off here and open up the bleeder screw, and as you push that in, the old fluid will come out through here, and that's not a bad way to cycle through your brake fluid as well. Okay, so we can see we've got plenty of room, and that fluid's nice and clean, so we're just going to push that piston in by grabbing a little pry bar here. You can also use a large screwdriver. This is that little Mayhew Dominator I've been using lately, and it works great. You just put it right in here through this little opening, and we're just trying to catch either the pad or the edge of the brake shoe there, and see how I just pry that? That just moves easily. Now what I'll do also sometimes is just shift this pry bar over, make sure that we can push that caliper piston all the way back in. A lot of times you can't do that if you're just prying on the outside edge, but if you push it back in and slide it between the inside pad and the rotor, you can pry it the rest of the way in. All right, now we can loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts. Those are 14 millimeter. Set those aside. Now these rear calipers are super lightweight, but I still suggest you don't let that hang from the brake hose. So I'm just going to still use this little hook and just hang it over here on the inside of the edge of that coil spring, just so it's out of the way so that we can take off this caliper bracket. Then we can pull off the old brake pads here, and you can see they're pretty worn down. Not quite rubbing on that little squealer, but pretty close. All right, now we need to remove these two bolts here that hold this caliper support bracket. And those are 17 millimeter, and they're on there pretty good, so you might need a little breaker bar. Can't quite fit the impact in here. There we go. Now we'll just zip those off real quick. Helps to have one hand on this so that it doesn't drop when you take those bolts out. All right, so now we can take off this rotor or disc drum combo, rotor drum combo. It looks like this is stuck on here pretty good here at the hub. A lot of times these will just come right off. Just make sure that your parking brake is off. If the parking brake's on, you're not gonna get this off. You may need to coax it off a little bit. A couple ways to do that. You can see we've got these threaded holes right here that we can get a couple bolts and put in there and tighten those. And as they tighten, they're basically pushing on the hub almost like a press, and that can pop this off. Sometimes we just need to use this right here, the Rotor Remover 9000. Just takes a few taps. This is also called a Tanya Harding. Well, let's just give it a whack on either side here. Hurts my ears. There we go. All right, we got it. All right, now there's the parking brake shoes. It's always a good idea to inspect them and make sure we don't have any issues, but this looks fine. Now before I put the new drum rotor combo on, I'm gonna clean this hub up so that hopefully the next time that we need to take this off, it's not gonna get stuck on all this rust. And a couple ways to do that. I'm just gonna use this little wire brush or wire wheel. Just make sure that you are going to wear some safety goggles if you're going to use something like this. Okay, that'll do it. Now, before I put the new rotor drum combo on here, I'm just going to hit this little hub with some of this Permatex anti-seize. That just will help us take it off next time, prevent that some of that rust, or prevent that from getting hung up on there. You don't really need to coat the entire hub. Mostly this little shoulder here, or this little edge, is where they get stuck. But you can do a little bit more than that if you'd like. Now, before we put the new rotor drum combo, it's a good idea to use some brake cleaner here. Just need to wipe off all of the oil or the grease that these are packed in. They pack them in something like that that will prevent them from rusting. And then we can put that on. Now, another thing I want to point out, you see this little rubber plug right here in the old one? We do need to pull that out. A lot of times you can just grab these with a little screwdriver. And the purpose of this plug is you can adjust your parking brake shoes through this little opening. But let's just put it in there so we don't forget it. All right, now we need to clean up the caliper bracket here. I'm just going to pop these old springs off. They call those abutment clips, and you can see underneath here it's really corroded. So we're going to clean that up with a wire wheel and try to protect that as well before we put the new ones on. Yeah, same thing. We got quite a bit of corrosion there. So remember, wear some safety glasses here, and we're just going to clean this up. Now I'm just going to brush a little bit of this brake grease underneath where those clips go, because that will help prevent some of that corrosion from building up underneath. Basically, they call that rust jacking, and that'll cause your pads to bind up. Now, you don't want to use too much, because we do need to make sure that these clips sit nice and flush. All right, now on the replacement abutment clips, they actually give us in the package 2 different styles. You can see that these are a different shape, and the ones we need to use are this one. It's not identical to the ones that we took off. You can see that this has a continuous piece or a bar across there, but these are the ones that fit, and these are the ones we're going to use. So we just need to line those up, and they're pretty easy to snap in place. Just line those up. Press them down. Sometimes these little center parts right here that go down in the middle, you kind of have to force those down to make sure that they don't rub on the rotor, but that looks like that's going to work. Now the next thing we need to do is pull out and re-grease these slide pins. These ones aren't too dirty, but we're just going to wipe off the old grease, and let's go ahead and put on some new grease. You need to use the special synthetic brake grease. You can't just use regular petroleum-based grease, or these will get too hot and they'll get gummy and they'll stick. The backs usually aren't as bad as the fronts because they don't get as hot, but these still look okay. Let's just pull them out, clean them, and make sure we always add some new grease in there. That one's got the little rubber bushing here. That's why I usually just take out one at a time, so that I always make sure that I put that back in the same location. There we go. Now the other thing I like to do before I put in this bracket is I like to get a little bit of this caliper grease on these little abutment clips, which is where the pad is going to ride. Now you don't want to put a lot in there. You'll just create a lot of brake dust, but just a little bit, because that's where the pad needs to slide. But this is ready to go back on. Before I put the caliper bracket back on, I'm going to put some thread lock on these 2 bolts here. Just a little bit like that, and we'll just kind of roll that around, spread that around like so, and then we can put the caliper bracket back on. Let's get those started. And these clips are kind of loosely fitted in there. I think they're going to work all right. Really would be nice if they gave us some better ones that fit better in there, but I think they're still going to be better than these old ones. I have had to clean these in the past, you know, as best I could and reuse them, but I think these new ones are going to work. They're just not really snug in there, but I think once we get the pads in there, that'll hold them in place. All right, we're just going to snug that up. And the torque spec that I found online for these is 65 foot-pounds. This is the gear wrench 85062 that I'm using. Now on the new pads, you'll notice they come with these clips separate, and the ones that I took off were on the bottom. So we're just going to do the same exact thing and put these on the bottom. I just like to copy what was on the vehicle. Sometimes if you get a chance, you can look that up and double check. But in this case, it looks like that's where they were. So we're going to just put them in the exact same place. And I do like to put just a little bit of this brake grease on the back of that shim, just to keep it quiet. Again, not too much, just a small amount. And just set those in place. Same with the inside one here. Just kind of clip this little, these are like little noise makers or little squealers. We'll just position it right like that. It just clips right in place. And this is a real thin coat here. And then at either end. There we go, just kind of angle that and it'll snap in place. Now here's just a quick trick with these clips. I sometimes will put a little flathead screwdriver here right in this little edge, and that will press these clips down a little bit more in place, and it also makes sure that they don't rub on the rotor. All right, and then we can grab the caliper here and just gonna unhook that where we have that hanging. Now before we put this on, I'm just gonna brush this a little bit and clean that up. Just gonna brush some of the corrosion and dust. Looks like this caliper is aluminum, that's why it's so light. So we've got a little bit of oxidation, but nothing too bad. I usually will hit the outside edge here with a little bit of that grease as well. You can see that boot, sometimes we need to push that back in. That little rubber boot was kind of sticking out, so pushing that back in, kind of massaging that in with a little bit of that silicone grease. And then this is good to go back on. And then we can put the caliper slide pin bolts back in. We'll just zip those in real quick. And then we can torque these caliper slide pin bolts to 20 foot-pounds. There we go. And you can see sometimes those slide pins will spin and you'll just need to grab an open end wrench to hold it steady while you torque it. There we go. And you're done. Now just remember to step on the brake pedal several times before you drive out. When you do that, that's going to push the caliper piston back out, pressing those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. And when you're doing that, don't press the brake pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. Just press it down about halfway several times until it feels firm, and then you should be good to go. And then remember to also double check the fluid level in your master cylinder. Make sure that that's all topped off where it needs to be. If you do need to adjust your parking brake, you can pop this rubber cap off, and there's just a little star wheel adjuster you can reach in there with a flathead screwdriver. We just tested this one and it's still grabbing just fine, so we're not messing with it at all. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.